Before I start, if anyone's lost some sunglasses from the back area there, come and see me. Otherwise, it's finders keepers. So I have been given the task of talking about the establishing and planting of the church 1925 to 1960. But I am actually going to start a little bit before that, because a lot of God's work was done in the background before all of this. So we're going to be talking about this afternoon the beginnings of our faith in our community, the raising of a church, the changes to its geographical position, the school presence, the community services associated with the church, and the impact on our community. Now, I would ask you to be kind to us, because we have used memories that are sometimes difficult to access with total accuracy. I, for one, am sure I remember a time when I was very handsome, but some disagree. Even facts are hard to trust at times. For example, on one site on the internet it says that the Lismore SDA Church was totally destroyed in the 2022 floods. Yeah. Even a small error in grammar can make a difference. During the last floods, one posting on the news stated that there was a flock of cows on a hill surrounding a house for safety. So let's now take a snapshot and look at the establishment and planting of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the Lismore area. You know, it's amazing how God uses the most unlikely beginnings in his work. We would be impatient and choose to rush things, but he takes his time to bring together a patchwork of people and circumstances to ensure his work has a firm foundation that will stand the test of time. Tom Irvine. Tom Irvine was Don Irvine's great-grandfather, Thomas Irvine, and was born in 1836 of Protestant parents in Northern Ireland and grew up in a devout Methodist family. He migrated to Australia and originally settled on Harwood Island in the Clarence River. On marrying into a family from the Coraki area of the Richmond River, in 1877 he moved to that district in the Tomkey estate between Coraki and Casino, an area adjacent to McKees Hill. He stayed there for 30 years and then moved to the current family property at McKees Hill before he passed away 13 years later on Tuesday the 27th of January 1920. Due to poor roads, Coraki was a distribution hub where a rowing skiff was sent out with supplies to downriver townships. Now, I'm going to put in a little bit of extra history that's got not much to do with it, but because it lays the foundation of how God works. Mr. Lewis Butler also had a store at Woodburn. Each fortnight, he would row up the river delivering groceries as far as Tomkey, and taking orders as he went and delivering them a fortnight later. He eventually sold up and moved to Wahroonga, where he ran a shop at the Wahroonga train station. After becoming very sick, he became the first patient at the Sand before its official opening in 1903. Because of the influence of the nurses and doctors during his treatment, he became an Adventist, and the Butler family are well known in the Adventist Church in Australia and around the world. So back to Thomas. During his youth in Ireland, Thomas Irvine had been interested in the Orange Lodge, which was an international Protestant fraternal order based in Northern Ireland. So Thomas formed the first chapter of the Orange Lodge in Australia. But he was a bit of a Bible student, and from his Bible study, Thomas found that there was no biblical authority for the keeping of Sunday as sacred, and constantly told his lodge members that they were worshipping on the wrong day. He also maintained that the second coming was a doctrine not sufficiently emphasised in the Protestant church of the day. So he began keeping the seventh day holy, but didn't know if anyone else was. Watching the boats travelling up the river to Casino one day, a person on board threw him a copy of the Bible Echo. Maybe. Turn it on. He read in there an article about the Second Advent. So he wrote to the Pacific Publishing House, which was founded in 1874 by James White in Oakland, California. And because email was not quite ready in that time, it took the mail 12 months for the round-trip reply, and through this he got in touch with Pastor and Mrs. Daniels, who was the president of the Australian Conference and later became the GC president. Mrs. Daniel wrote back and invited him to the first Seventh-day Adventist meeting in Australia. The first Seventh-day Adventist meeting in Australia at Brighton Beach, Melbourne, in 1893. That was actually December 29th, 1893 to January 15, 1894. So quite a journey, as you can imagine, and Thomas took a steamship all that way. Once again, a little diversion. There were some interesting events at that church camp addressed in the book Angels Over Her Tent. And I read, although always busy, Mrs. White still found time for evangelistic activities. This is the first camp meeting she also went to in Australia. At the camp meeting, she presented a series of talks to large crowds. One such series she conducted during the Brighton Beach camp meeting, held from December 29 to January 15. It was the first Seventh-day Adventist camp meeting ever held in Australia, and Mrs. White had just returned from New Zealand. When Mrs. White arrived at Brighton Beach, the campsite contained more than 100 tents housing 511 people. The careful, orderly arrangement of the tents and grounds impressed the many non-Adventist visitors who flocked to the meetings. The large audiences included doctors, ministers of other churches, and businessmen. They crowded into the main tent to hear Mrs. White speak on such topics as the Ten Commandments, Sabbath keeping, and the events heralding the second coming of Christ. The wonders of the Adventist camp meeting quickly became a local topic of conversation. Mrs. White said herself that she had not seen such religious dedication and enthusiasm since the Millerite meetings of 1843 and 1844. But not everyone appreciated the camp meeting so highly. To a group of juvenile delinquents, larrikins, the Australians called them, living in a nearby town, it represented a chance to have some fun. It sounds like our current campgrounds, doesn't it? They began to do little acts of vandalism and mischief. Their leader outlined a plan to pull Mrs. White's tent down on her next night. He considered her the most important person among the Adventists, but some of the gang bragged about their plan to the camp students' guards. Learning what the larrikins wanted to do, Fairleigh Masters, one of the Bible school students, went to the faculty and warned them about the teenagers' gang schemes. The teachers hurried to the Melbourne Police headquarters and asked for protection for the campsite. The city sent a tall, heavy-built Irish Roman Catholic policeman out to the little tent to guard Mrs. White's tent. And I wonder at God's sense of humour here, sending a Protestant Irishman to a campground being guarded by a Roman Catholic Irishman to a Seventh-day Adventist camp meeting. Interestingly enough, that policeman, the Roman Catholic policeman, went on to become an Adventist through an amazing circumstance. And I'm not going to tell you what that was. You'll have to read it. But it was quite amazing. Mrs. Daniels saw Tom Irvine at the camp smoking a pipe and told him that Adventists did not smoke. And he replied, "If Adventists don't smoke, neither do I." He then threw the pipe into one of the many 44-gallon drums in the centre aisle of the tent used for heating. And I'm not too sure that he intended to share his tobacco with the entire tent. At the end of the camp meeting, he was baptised and returned to the Northern Rivers district of New South Wales, keeping up correspondence with Mrs. A.G. Daniels. It's interestingly, it was stated in an article in The Gleaner, July 1896, that Brother Irvine has for several years been holding up the light and truth alone in the Richmond River District, New South Wales. Interesting enough, the only person early on that Thomas was able to convert was his daughter-in-law Mary, Don Irvine's grandmother. Don recalls that when Tom was dying, he and his daughter-in-law, Mary, prayed all night that a pastor would arrive so that he would not be buried in the pauper cemetery. And an SDA pastor arrived the next day. Because of Thomas Irvine's interest, colporteurs were sent to the north coast of New South Wales, among the first being Mr. R.S. Bell and Mr. T.A. Chapman in 1897. The colporteurs would arrive at Coraki by steamship and stay with interested families while canvassing by bicycle in the district. In 1897, colporteur Harry John Cooper settled in Lismore and commenced canvassing across Richmond River Valley and the rural settlement of Corndale. Brother Cooper sold a book to James Hill and then went to the home of Mr. Alfred Davis. Mr. Cooper was travelling the area on horseback, and as he was about to leave this farm, his horse became ill. Mr. Davis invited him to spend the night in their home, and during conversation that evening, Brother Cooper discovered that Mr. Davis had been praying for greater understanding of the Scriptures for some time. When he returned to his home, Brother Cooper immediately wrote a letter requesting that a church worker be sent to study with this family. A Mr. Concord came and conducted Bible studies in the Davis home, and interested neighbours attended also. It is thought that the second Seventh-day Adventist Church in New South Wales, north of Sydney, was organised in the home of Brother and Sister Davis at Corndale about 1897. 14 members, included children, were present. The church membership grew rapidly, and in 1899 the members started planning for a church building. At this time, about 30 members were meeting in Brother Havilard's home. It was Brother Havilard who donated land from his farm on which a church could eventually be built in 1908. Brother Haynes as the deacon and Brother C. Chilcott as the elder. When Pastor Parp arrived, he held meetings in the Corndale Hall. As a result, and as you can see, it says up there, the Corndale Hall of 130 years was swept away in the 2022 floods. As a result, Mr. and Mrs. Alfred Davis, Mr. and Mrs. William Arthur and Mr. E. Havilar joined the church, followed shortly by Mr. and Mrs. James Hill. Early members of the Corndale Church were the families of William Arthur, Edward Arthur, James Hill, Vic Gaggan, Thomas Irvine, Brother Havilar, Vic and Frank Burnoth, Alfred Davis, Cecil Griffith, Jack Parmenter, Percy Ward, Mrs. Pearce and Mrs. Towatts. Percy Ward was Barry Shelford's grandfather. Percy Ward was originally baptised in Parkes and was a member in the Corndale Church before moving to Murwillumbah, where a church was eventually established. Pastor Mervyn Whitaker also worked around Corndale, and it is told that he often worked till late at night in going by horse and cart. When he was ready to go home, he would just go to sleep and the horse would take him home. Unfortunately, over time, the members dispersed. The Hill family went to Kyogle, where a church was also established. Edward Arthur went to Ballina, and a church established there. And by 1935, the Corndale Church was disbanded because members had all moved to other areas due to better roads and easier travel. That church was then moved to Burringbar in 1936 and served as an Adventist church there for many years. Previous to this, the church gathering was known as the Upper Burringbar Company. Some of the Arthur family and the Irvines moved to Lismore, where a church was also established in 1925, 100 years ago. And the original Lismore church was built on the corner of Uralba and Brewster Street. and it was dedicated on October 30, 1926. At that time, Don's grandparents and Don's parents shared owning a car, and because there was too many of them, they alternated which family would go to church. Because of the history on the spot where we are standing now. This was so the church in Brewster Street could be moved behind the house. Their son Mark was baptised without his consent, as Pauline was pregnant with him at the time. 26 floods in all followed in groups of 2 to 3, the highest being 12.11 metres until 1960. And in July 1962, 3 floods peaked at 11.6 on July 11. I'm of the understanding that 2 houses with large backyards adjacent to each other on Uralba Street were then purchased. There was no house on the corner of Brewster and Shepherd's Lane at that point, around the corner, so they were able to use this land as access, and the church building was brought up from Brewster Street on truck and placed in position, which is now our hall. A house was built on this land very soon afterwards. That is the corner where they came through. The house in front of the church was then pulled down to build the current church building we are in. The hall church was then raised, the original kitchen area opened out, a ceiling added, and the length extended, and the wall cladded inside and out, which is our present hall. And now Colin Bryant will talk to us about the activities around the move to our present location and the establishment of our current church. And I hope you'll be kind with Colin today, because talking about 100-year birthdays, it's his birthday today. Turning 65, he's an old man, 1 year older than me. So be kind to him.
Yeah, 1960 was a good year. So I just go up with the years, it makes it a bit easier. Just a little bit of history on my family. My parents are Henry and Burley Bryant, and I'm the second eldest of the family. And originally, my great-great-grandmother was an orphan and was taken in by Tom Kent, the original Tom Kent. And that's one of the reasons why we're a Seventh-day Adventist today. Came through my grandmother's position. So in 1956, so it was said on the date that the blocks were bought. The church was 44 years where the church is now, and the 46 Albert Street where the house is next door here. Pastor Braden and others, as we learned last night, the planning of the church and the relocation in the 1960s, or after the 1960s, around that time anyway. And we've seen some picture of the first one, Warren. This is a Northern Star clip that was advertised when the church was shifted. So an article was put into the Northern Star, and this is what Dad had cut out of the paper and gone with. As we now know, had a lot to do with the planning of the church and relocation in the 1960s, as we said. And relocation was necessary, as we've just seen too, because of the floods. And that was numerous floods. A lot of cleaning and a lot of effort fixing them up. After the flood, when it was down on number 16 Uralba Street, the church. And then there's the only picture that I could find at home from Mum was the next one. And you might know these couple here. That's Calvin and Mari Chilcott coming down the steps of the old church down the bottom in 16 Uralba Street. So that's the only one I could find of the old church that I had at home anyway. The reason for being a good year is that the Seventh-day Adventist Church was moved safely above the flood zone, which was the most important thing they had to do, is to get it above the flood zone. A one classroom school building was also relocated at the same time and now serves as the kitchen in the adjoining hall where we were. And I can remember JMV's was in the old house here, and they had it in rooms. Warren Douglas, I think Mr. Leeson had a little bit to do with that as well. And I can remember doing bookwork on the veranda and honours and things, which is, pretty amazing actually, before they pulled it down. I can remember, the next one is just a picture of the students, which has already been put up by Cherie. Some might notice some of these students. If you look closely at the rear, Stephen, my big brother, the tallest guy is Lee Edwards, but Stephen is to the left, and to the right is Greg Brown. And like he said, originally there was only about 14 or 15 students, and when they went swimming on a Thursday afternoon, they all jumped in the back of... That was my first car, actually, I bought off Dad. But that HG wagon, and they'd all fit in. So lucky there was no seatbelts and laws back then about that. You mightn't have thought I was such a bad person at school, but I was a little bit mischievous. I can remember one time I got into trouble for hiding the feather duster. I don't know why that was for, but it was a good thing to hide, so I wouldn't hopefully get into trouble. Also, at the back of the building, before the second part was built on, or the second room, there was a door from the teacher's desk behind him, usually locked. And I don't know how we managed to get it open, but there's about a 2-metre drop on the other side. I think a couple of us climbed out, but So that was one of the things we got up to. It was really good. I don't know how one teachers do it with the teaching that we do these days, and teach all the subjects and teach all the years as well. It's pretty amazing. So, there's a lot more that I can say there. The one on the right-hand side at the front is Barry Goodwin, which was Darcy Goodwin's son. And then beside that, it looks like David Bryan. Righto. Around 1965 to early 70s, the church down the back was very, very crowded. I can remember them putting out chairs in the aisles for the church service to seat everyone down, and some were even, all the younger ones or younger students or younger people were in the schoolroom at some stage to take off some of the relief from the church, and that's the reason why we needed a new church. And so, it was good to have the numbers growing in the Lismore church. Now, during this period, there was extensive fundraising efforts were undertaken to support the relocation and especially the construction of the new church where we meet today. And Darcy Goodwin had a lot of extensive fundraising efforts undertaken to growing watermelons and potatoes on people's properties, on members' properties, and on Neville's as well. So there was a fair bit happening to raise money. It was a very big time, and to get money and get organised for that. Fun events to raise money were put on at Tullera Hall because we didn't have quite room at the church to do these things. And I can remember a hall off New Balnacutting that we used. So you'd pay money to go into events. There was a small prize, but most of the money was made to profit for the church, which worked out really good. There was potato races, three-legged races. There was all sorts of things, and several other games that were played, and you had a chance to win. Now, you could buy also, around this time, two-dimensional small bricks. So that means like a drawing of a brick, which would annotate to a real brick for the church. So you could support the church in just buying a few bricks every now and then, which would help in the construction of the church. And I can remember the fun night at the Leesons during a number of fundraising things, especially the pillow fights. We're sitting on a log about 1.5 metres off the ground. We're lucky we had something soft to land on when we came off, because I seem to come off a lot. I'm pretty sure it was better if you were a little bit heavier. You didn't come off as easy, I thought. Even a walkathon was organised by Neville, and I can remember going in that as well to raise money. There was always a fair bit of money raised at some of these nights or events. Now, as the old church was also being demolished on site, which is this side here that we're on now, parts were sold off to raise money, and there was a lot, and I mean a lot, of working bees. Maybe with WHS these days they might let you do what you did back then, but there was a lot of working bees to get things going on site around here, and pulling the old house down and all sorts of stuff. Now, a street store was also running at the time in Lismore and Carrington Street. Most of the members and congregation would bring produce, cakes, biscuits, and all sorts of goodies to be sold to raise money, made up by themselves. There were bring and buy nights. And when the prices were put on to buy and see what they would get to sell, and then the auction off. I remember Neville Leeson was a really good auctioneer, and I remember even one of his auctions, Neville Wheeler, I've got that wrong. Not reading my notes. Neville Wheeler, and one cake went for nearly $80. So there was always some good strong bidding between the members of the congregation, and it was all in fun, and it was all raising money for the church before it was built. So that's another good thing that had. Like the parable of the talents, money was given to the congregation. Money given to the congregation, that's different, isn't it? Say $10 or something like that. Now, you would look after that as an investment and show an increase to raise money. some of the things they came up with is pretty amazing back then. And really, I think God was behind a lot of that stuff that happened. So examples might be buy seeds, grow produce like vegetables or flowers to be sold and make money. I mean, some would have increased, some around about tenfold. So that was pretty amazing back then when this happened. And I even know for a fact, because I've been around a fair while, I've been in the church since I was born, but I didn't get baptised till I was about 13. The male toilets under the old school, the urinal, is the same as the one under the hall there now. Don't get me why I get that, but anyway, it's a fact. I know. Righto, Pastor Hugh Dickens came between 1971 and 73 and saw most of the church construction, but it wasn't finished till about 1974. And I'm pretty sure Pastor Ivan Vickery was there around at that time. And it was shortly after that it was dedicated to God and opening the new church. Also, Pastor Al Riggins was the pastor at the time when it was officially opened on the 6th of September 1975. Bruce Duncan, MLA, Pastor C. Judd, President at the time of the Trans-Tasman Union Conference, and the Mayor of Lismore, Gordon Blair. Thank you. And handovers to Neville Leeson. Oh, sorry, Myrtle.
Well, my story goes back. The original church school in our area was built at Corndale in 1907. The members there really wanted a Christian school for their children, and they purchased some land, or they built the school on the property of a Mr. W.M. Arthur. The school was built there and continued for some time. And a lot of those pioneers that Colin just talked about were involved there at the Corndale School, at the Corndale Church. The school was built at Durrabee, and those attending the school included members of the Arthur family, the Hill family, and the Ward family. The Arthur family later moved to out into that area, and many of them were pioneers of the Lismore Church. The Hill family moved to Kyogle, and the Ward family became charter members of the Murwillumbah Church, and I know quite a lot about the Ward family because they were my husband's grandparents. The school was transferred to the Kyogle area when the Hill family, which were a large family, moved to Kyogle, but didn't last very long and eventually closed. During the 1940s, there was a strong movement by the members of the Lismore Church to establish a school where their children could receive Christian education. And the Lismore, as you've heard, the Lismore Seventh-day Adventist Church was built on the corner of Uralba and Brewster Streets. And the people prayed and worked hard, and eventually purchased an old hall from the Austinville Showgrounds. They dismantled the hall, brought it to the church, and built it behind the church facing Brewster Street. It was built up very high with steep steps, and they hoped that it would be free from flooding. The teacher, Miss Deirdre Holmes, and 15 students began that school year in the little back room of the church because the school wasn't ready for them. And it went on from there to serve the church, but in 1953 Lismore had a catastrophic flood. The teacher who was teaching there at that stage was a Miss Heather Thorburn, and she reported that it was possible to row a boat to the school and swim in through the windows. That's what the flood was like at that time. And of course, that made them feel we have to move. Now, the 1959 school year was a difficult year at the school. The teacher was a Miss Olive Bladen, and Miss Bladen caught shingles, and it affected her eyesight. She was unable to teach. And so relief teachers cared for the school until September, when Wanda Niebuhr arrived, and she taught there for the rest of the year. At the beginning of the 1960 school year, I arrived in Lismore to care for the school. I was newly graduated from Avondale College, and it was my first appointment. I was horrified when I saw the school, because tied up under the school was a little boat. And I could only imagine what I would do if we were confronted by a flood when I was in the school. The church was working hard to find a suitable place to move, and as Colin said, they managed to purchase a large home at 44 Uralba Street, which is where we are now. And we're sitting where the house was. So it was in, the church was, or the school was loaded onto a truck, a large truck, in August 1960, and it was towed up the street, up Uralba Street, round the corner into Diadem Street, and through a vacant block of land. Now, when you think about it, that was absolutely God's leading, because that block of land was free for us to bring the church and the school through that block of land. And a couple of months later, there was a house built on the land, and we never got it through. It was placed towards the back of the land, and this church followed, was also towed up and established there. Now, it took us a fair time to get the school ready for the students to go into, and once again we operated our school from the small back room of the church until the steps were built up onto where the hall is now, and the foundations were put in, and we were able to be free and feel that we were free of flooding. Now, in 1972, there was an additional classroom and a small office were built at the back of that. That small office is now our pantry church at the back of the hall, and then the other room that is there already. 1973, the school was organised into a two-teacher school with students coming from Ballina, Casino, Kyogle and Lismore churches attending. So it became a regional school. The school rapidly outgrew its location, and after much searching, a property was purchased at the end of Blue Hills Avenue in Gunnellabar. And the new school was opened in 1978. It was renamed Blue Hills College in 1991. That school is Blue Hills College, no longer simply a little primary school, but dealing from kindergarten right through to the end of high school till year 12. I wonder if I could see the hands of those who have been students at the Lismore Seventh-day Adventist School or Blue Hills College. Could I see your hands? Look around the room. How many people have been affected and led by the work of these places? We still have members here who were pioneers in our area, descendants of those pioneers. We have Keith Hill, who comes to church here, who was one of the Hill family from out there at Corndale. We have a number of the descendants of the Arthur family here today, whose parents were pioneers out there. And we also have a member, or had a member here this morning, of the Ward family, who were my husband's grandparents. What a wonderful job those people did. And now it's our job to carry on the work.
Well, it's my privilege to share with you this afternoon probably what I would think was the largest project involving voluntary labour that this church has ever undertaken. And that occurred in the years... Warren, you can put on the first slide if you wish. Yep. In the period 2002 to 2004. My wife, Annette, and I, and our 4 children, came to this church in 1970. And I've enjoyed being a member of this church until the middle of last year, and I enjoy where I am now, out at Alstonville. But seeing I had been living in Alstonville for about 10 years, I thought it was time to move. But I really enjoyed the period of time here. I just wish to do a little recap here. So there's the original church down on the corner of Brewster and Yarralba Street. And as we've learnt, the church was established down there in 1925. The school was established down there in 1950. Both were moved to the current site in 1960. A second classroom was added in 1972. This church was dedicated in 1974. And in 1978, a move was made out to Blue Hills. This picture was taken probably around 1978. And there's the new church in the foreground here with the old church, which by then had become a hall, straight behind it, and you might be able to make out right in the far background the steps and landing up to the second classroom. Well, by the year 2000, the hall was needing repairing. The hall was of insufficient size, we needed an enlarged and improved kitchen. In fact, the facilities were virtually non-existent. The toilets needed modernising and internally accessible. The only way to get from this church to at least the men's toilet, and there was one women's toilet downstairs, but most were outside, was to go outside this building, and that was true also for the hall. The op shop had commenced in a very small space under the western end of the current hall in the year 2000, and more space was needed for the op shop. Also, there was no internal link between this building and the one behind, and an internal link was really a necessity. Nor was there wheelchair accessibility to the hall, and so that was required. And so between 2002 and 2004, the hall and what is now the kitchen, which was then the oldest classroom, was raised by 0.5 metre, 500 millimetres. Excavation was carried on under those two buildings, and rooms are formed. The foyer was taken off the eastern end of the hall, and the hall was extended a further 5.5 metres, and a new foyer was added. And this first slide, you can see in the foreground here the eastern end of the hall with the foyer removed, and you can see the first classroom behind it, also raised 500 millimetres and with excavation done. This is under what is now the kitchen, and you can see work being carried on there. And this is also under that same building where groundwork is being carried out, ready to pouring the footings for the brickwork that would ensure. By the way, there were some rather deep footings, and one day somebody said, "Where's Ralph Lee?" Now, Ralph was relatively short, and we looked around and we couldn't see Ralph, but suddenly we saw a hat peeping out of the top of these circular footings. They were quite deep. This next slide shows looking under the western end of the hall where the toilet block currently is, and this slide will show you, this slide shows you just some of the dirt that was excavated, and I think this is under the eastern end. Yes, this one is under the eastern end of the hall, and you can see where it's been extended, the 5.5 metres, to make a much larger hall. The brickwork has almost been completed here, and this is looking back down toward the western end under the hall to where the current toilet block is. Right outside you can see the hall on the right, and the kitchen above on the left there, and underneath what now is the op shop. And this shows much the same again. On the right was the first classroom. On the left, the second classroom. Now you might wonder, well, why aren't they have the same floor level? Well, when the second classroom was added in 1972, it was higher than the original first classroom, and you used to step from the first classroom up into that building on the left there. But now, and it was high enough, so we didn't need to raise it. The other one was raised, and now you step down. Foyer is taking shape here, and the extension toward the east. Roof truss going on here, and here you have the building underway. Now, I don't know if you can pick... Does this thing point? I think it does, doesn't it? Which way do I point? This way. Yeah, can you see there? Now, that's where we created a link from this. When you enter this room, there's a passageway now that leads through to the hall. That didn't exist. So that allowed a link from this church through to the hall. And you'll see another link in a moment. The roof is being added there. This is inside the hall, looking toward the eastern end, and you can see where the 5.5 metres has been added. And so, also involved, of course, was the internal toilet block, wheelchair accessibility that you will have noticed, a modern kitchen and pantry. There was a lot of internal sheeting work to be done, more than we ever did underneath here back in the early 70s, because there was a much larger area there to do, and crews were needed to come in and hold it up, and that sheeting was quite heavy because we used fire-resistant sheeting. I'll comment on the plastering a little later because there's one person in particular I'd like to thank there. And the church was connected to the hall, both upstairs here and downstairs. So there we are in the kitchen area where sheeting has been done and the plastering. And I wish to thank David, who is here, David Waters, and I know Jill was involved, and so was David's wife Hazel, who has since passed away. And they spent literally weeks, months, and we left the finer work of the plastering to David and his team. Thank you, David. We broke through underneath too to obtain a link from under the church here through under the hall, and the space in which we had to work was pretty cramped. We provided improved car parking within the church grounds, and there were teams of us who would form up, put in all of the reinforcing and help with the pouring. The only thing that we didn't do was do the finishing. We got professionals to come in to do that. Then there was the exterior of the buildings to clad. We did all that cladding with Colorbond. Big job. Making sure you ordered the right lengths, making sure that you cut it out, the windows in just the right spaces and so on. That job fell to me. Scaffolding, wish to thank Steve Bilson, who loaned us, and I've got another comment in thanks to Steve a bit later, but who loaned us his mobile scaffolding, and we became pretty proficient at assembling it each day and disassembling it of a night to pack it away so it didn't get stolen. Op shop facilities were also provided. Out the front of the old church cum hall, there were steps, and they had been poured or made into a solid block, and so when it was removed, that solid block was placed down in the corner of what now is the car park. Pastor Eaton was caring for the church at that stage. He was a retired pastor. Every morning he would come down with his heavy hammer and he would belt away at that block, and slowly, bit by bit, he reduced it down to manageable sizes. And so we thank you for that, Pastor Eaton. I don't think he's with us today. There were the tiling of the toilets. I know Pastor Tim will talk to you in a minute, set me going on the first row and said, you just carry on like this. It was my first time ever tiling, but it seemed to work. Painting, yes, lots to do. All right, here's the car park where we've just finished it off, I think. You'll notice now that the building here, the cladding is on. And so that was quite a big job, especially getting up right up under the eaves of that one on the right there. We were on tippy toes on the top of the plank, on the top of the scaffolding that we had. And so special thanks to Brian Suffolk for the draftsmanship that he provided for us, Steve Bilson and his group for raising the buildings, David Waters and family for plastering, Keith Fry, Ray Ferry, Tim Merritt, Ken Perry for their jobs, and the numerous volunteers. Yes, what a marvellous group you were here in Lismore. The volunteers that came in, many of whom are no longer alive. But, our thanks go to them. The op shop, I was asked to make a few quick comments on it. As you know, it began in 2000. It moved into the new rooms underneath in 2004. Today, the op shop enjoys strong public support and demand, and it enjoys popularity for its low prices and assistance to needy through free clothing. It's staffed by both church members and non-members. And I think Pastor Tim in a moment is going to probably mention the role that it played in the 2022 flood, so I won't steal his thunder there. But I thought you might like to see a couple of slides of the op shop. You'll notice outside of the racks on which we have free clothing that the townspeople really appreciate, and they're very generous in their thanks to us. As you enter the op shop on the left, there's a room with men's clothing here on the left. Shoes you can see at the back. There's tableware, Manchester and other items in that room. To the right, as you go in the door, the ladies section, you'll notice that things, pretty well every item of clothing sells for $2. Occasionally there's something that's really special and that's put on a special rack, but there are only a couple of those. And in the back room, more goodies. A couple of quick observations. I already mentioned the size of the project that we undertook. It's been my observation over the years that once you start to do something, you turn the first sod, people will start giving generously. And people gave to this cause. And we thank the Lord for that. Thank the Lord for the voluntary support of the people who helped. And the Lord's blessing. To my knowledge, and I was the one that was kind of the overseer of the project, to my knowledge, no one suffered serious injury. And we praise the Lord and thank the Lord for that. And I'm sure the hall and the op shop have been a real blessing to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Neville. It's very interesting, isn't it, when you look back on what's happened in the past. And, looking back since 1925, 100 years ago, it was interesting for me just reading back about how things actually started. Started with a big camp meeting, and things grew from there. There was baptisms from that, and that became the nucleus of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And what was really interesting for me was that from its very early inception, the church has been involved in the community. And that's one of the things that I'm going to share with you from my time here in Lismore. But going back to 1925, they were involved in the Lismore Show. And they went out to the Lismore Show and run some health programs at the Lismore Show. And it was really interesting reading the Northern Star article on our stand at the Lismore Show, because it was praised for its educational and its practicality in helping people to live a better lifestyle. And so that's really interesting for me. And what was really interesting for me is, yes, Neville shared that I was involved in some of the things that happened down here. Colin talked about the urinal. I remember Dave Waters, because I did some work on his place. He asked me to come and help him to sort out how that urinal was going to fit in the space that was there and how the tiling was going to happen around it. And yeah, so it was interesting that those things were actually mentioned as well. But I came to the church for the wrong reason back in 1989. And it was more for the social side rather than the spiritual side. I wasn't really connected to God at that time, but I was looking for a future partner. And Lismore Church had a few females in the church here. And my Auntie Joy there, she told me about one particular lady. And I ended up marrying that girl, didn't I, Auntie Joy? So yeah, that was my earliest time here. And I ended up getting married in this church in 1993. But it wasn't until, around 2003, 2004 that I read a book that's already been mentioned up here called The Desire of Ages. And that changed my perception on who God was. And I fell in love with that God. And I started on my spiritual journey of walking with the Lord from that time on. That led me into pastoral ministry, which took me over to Casino, and I ministered in Casino, then later on in Kyogle. And then in 2016, I was asked to come to Lismore Church. Now, it was very daunting for me to come to Lismore Church because there was a lot more members than I was used to, and I didn't feel that I had a gift in public speaking. So I really prayed about that, but God answered that prayer for me, and I ended up here in Lismore Church. But one of the things that really blew me away about what happened in 2016 when I started here was that when I would come to the church through the week, the church was open. There was people everywhere. And this happened on a daily occasion. This was an active church that was active in the community. On a Monday, the welfare ladies would be here and there'd be a stream of people coming for support through the welfare services. And on all the other days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the op shop was opened. And people would be getting help from the op shop on a daily basis. And it was just amazing the people that loved the op shop here in Lismore, especially for its prices, as Neville mentioned, and the variety of stuff that it actually had as well. Some of the other things that were happening here was the soup kitchen. So not only through the day these things would happen, but through the night and also through the day, people would go out and feed those in need down at the transit centre, out at Nimbin, and the people in the church would be making soup and other things. And those things are still happening in this place, which is really nice. And it's really nice being able to say to people that you're a Seventh-day Adventist in this town and they know about who we are because of what we do in the community. And one of the biggest things that I think had the biggest impact was on Monday, the 28th of February, is it 28th of February, 1922, Neville rang me up. I don't know if you can remember this, Neville, but Neville, 2022. Did I say 1922? Sorry, 2022. I wasn't here in 1922. 2022. Neville rang me up on Monday morning, the 28th of February, and he said, some people have been talking to me and thinking that the op shop might even get water in it through this flood. And I said, that's surely not, Neville. And he said, well, I'm thinking of going down to have a look. I said, okay, I'll come down. And I think we got here around about 7:30, 8 o'clock Monday morning, while the water was still rising, while the rain was still coming down. And we looked at the water level and it was the highest we've ever seen it in Lismore. And it was still rising. And there was still rain coming. So we made the decision, we rang up a few people and they came down and we started to get the stuff out of the op shop and we moved it up into the hall behind us. We went through underneath the church and we moved stuff from the library up a couple of shelves and we did a number of things like that in the morning. We were finished quite early in the morning, probably around 9 o'clock or so. And by this time, people from the community were coming in with their private boats and they were looking for a place to park. And I said, come and park in the car park here. And they parked their cars and trailers in the car park after putting their boat in just at the roundabout down here. And they went looking for people that might have been trapped in the floodwaters. And so after we finished getting all the stock from the op shop up into the hall here, I come back out to the front and I noticed the boats were starting to pull up at the bottom of Uralba Street at this roundabout here with people that were wet and drenched and had nowhere to go. And so we opened the front of the church here onto the veranda. We got some chairs out in the veranda, and these people were wet. They had no clothes, no dry stuff. And so I rang up the op shop staff and I said to them, look, how do you feel about me giving away some of your stock? And they said, we'll make a call, we'll ring around a few of the staff. They got back to me very shortly and said, no, if it's needed, we need to give it. And I said, well, you might end up with nothing because there seems to be a great need. And they said, we don't care if we end up with nothing, we'll deal with that afterwards, but there is a need in the community now. And so we started giving away stuff. There was towels we were using to dry people off. We were giving them jumpers and other things like that to keep them warm before people came in and took them to the evacuation centres. At the same time that morning, my wife had made a huge pot of soup for someone who needed it, and she asked, did I know of anyone that needed it? And I said, look, I might just bring it down to the church here. And we brought it down to the church, and that big pot of soup was gone within an hour. So I was on the phone to the church members, and within no time at all, they were here with food, extra food. And so we started from that time, on that Monday on, started to feed people as they were coming through, while the water was still coming up. And the water continued to come up until around about, I think it peaked around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, coming into the car park at the bottom of the church here. And it was pretty, but I was blown away by how much our members came in and helped at that time. Because what happens in Lismore when there's a flood, that the people that come and assist, they actually set up in the town, and so they have to wait for the floodwaters to recede before they can come and set up. So for that first week and a half, Lismore Church was the only distribution hub in the town. And for those next week, we were feeding on average around about 500 people a day with meals, either hot meals at lunchtime or stuff for them to take home as well. 500 people per day. A lot of those were emergency services that had nowhere to get food. Even at that time, Coles and Woolworths, the shelves were stripped of stock. And the amazing thing is, I think at this church we had more food that was usable than Coles and Woolies for a few days. Because what was amazing is that through social media and other methods, that people got to understand that Lismore Church was the main distribution centre for the town. And we couldn't actually hold church for 2 weeks because of the amount of stuff that was brought in to this church. I told the op shop people that we might have nothing. We ended up with way more stuff than we actually gave away. And you know, just about every single room in this church underneath, in the church here and in the hall out the back, was full of stuff that was being brought in. And I was just overwhelmed what people did. Just one example, I had a guy that drove down in his old car from Brisbane, and he bought a brand new pressure cleaner from Bunnings, and he heard that we were the distribution centre, so he pulled up there at the front and he said, I've just bought this for anybody. And I could tell he wasn't a well-off person himself, but he'd bought that. But that's just one story of many that came and happened. We had 3 vans pull up in Succinct full of cleaning products that we filled the pews in this church with, that we're able to give out as people were able to go back in and help out with our houses and cleaning out. And so for me, coming to this church and seeing how this church has been involved in the community and what impact that has had on community's perception of who we are and what we did was absolutely amazing. And I just hope that that continues in this space, and I hope that through those avenues that we will reach many for God's kingdom in this area. Thank you.